This reporter has been working on a story about me for 2 years.
Louisiana State women's basketball coach Kim Mulkey really put a shot across the bow of the Washington Post yesterday. Today her team won. They're going to the Sweet 16. But there is a looming story in the Washington Post coming out that had been rumored for a little bit now on social media. Well, Kim Mulkey did what we call in communication strategy a preemptive strike.
After 2 years of trying to get me to sit with him for an interview, he contacts LSU on Tuesday as we were getting ready for the first round game of this tournament with more than a dozen questions, demanding a response by Thursday, right before we're scheduled to tip off. Are you kidding me?
If it wasn't for Angel Reese, I would not know who Kim Mulkey was. I will say a lot of what she said at this press conference yesterday was very familiar to me as somebody who has dealt with the Washington Post on some crisis-related stories. So I'm going to play the entire press conference here and then come back on the other side with a few remarks about what she said.
This was a ridiculous deadline that LSU and I could not possibly meet, and the reporter knew it. It was just an attempt to prevent me from commenting and an attempt to distract us from this tournament. It ain't gonna work, buddy. Unfortunately, this is part of a pattern that goes back years. I told this reporter 2 years ago that I didn't appreciate the hit job he wrote on Brian Kelly, and that's why I wasn't going to do an interview with him. After that, the reporter called 2 former college coaches of mine and left multiple messages that he was with me in Baton Rouge to get them to call him back, trying to trick these coaches into believing that I was working with the Washington Post on a story. When my former coaches spoke to him and found out that I wasn't talking with the reporter, they were just distraught, and they felt completely misled. Former players have told me that the Washington Post has contacted them and offered to let them be anonymous in a story if they'll say negative things about me. The Washington Post has called former disgruntled players to get negative quotes to include in their story. They're ignoring the 40 plus years of positive stories that people or they have heard from people about me. But you see, reporters who give a megaphone to a one-sided embellished version of things aren't trying to tell the truth. They're trying to sell newspapers and feed the click machine. This is exactly why people don't trust journalists and the media anymore. It's these kinds of sleazy tactics and hatchet jobs that people are just tired of. I'm fed up, and I'm not going to let the Washington Post attack this university, this awesome team of young women I have, or me without a fight. I've hired the best defamation law firm in the country, and I will sue the Washington Post if they publish a false story about me. Not many people are in a position to hold these kind of journalists accountable, but I am, and I'll do it. That's all I'm going to say about this right now. And now I'm going to get back to talking about my basketball team and winning this game tomorrow.
Woo! Wow. So that was very interesting. So, of course, it's impossible to know exactly what she's talking about because the story has not come out yet. But so I'll talk in generalities here about a few of the things that she said. The thing that she said about the impossible deadline, getting a list of questions from a news organization right at the moment when the ball is about to be tipped off during March Madness. Yeah, that's a classic thing. I mean, with the Washington Post specifically, I got the call when I was consulting the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Justin Fairfax, it was the 8th of February, 2019. This is during the time when Me Too was really still sort of a big deal. Really slows down when Tara Reid shows up with an allegation that still lingers to this day. Slows down. And of course, it really slows down again when Johnny Depp and Amber Heard go to court. But really, in that moment in 2019, it was pretty vibrant. And yes, there was a phone call of react to this allegation within, 30 minutes. We want a statement and we're going to hit the publish button in 30 minutes, that type of thing, which is, I think, actually an impossible situation. So when I hear this sort of idea of we're giving you 12 questions and you have this deadline to answer that. And of course, everyone globally knows that March Madness is happening and this type of story is timed for that, for these games, because, of course, that's when everybody would be paying attention to Louisiana State University and Kim Mulkey and the whole thing. So it's not a coincidence. But I certainly have had it happen where a news organization calls and gives you really an impossible deadline to properly answer questions that require a real deep dive or some vetting from their side, which of course never seems to happen, at least not in a Me Too setting. And, you get this phone call and you're supposed to have this reaction. And a lot of times what happens too, a bigger thing that nobody talks about, is that to bring the full truth of a story out requires some investigation and some knowledge of the people who are involved. And you can't possibly do that in 30 minutes. And so what news organizations like to do is put stuff out first. And then if they find out what the full truth is later, so what? Big deal. First of all, they're shielded by Tom Sullivan. So the malice standard to me is impossible to it's an impossible hurdle for an elected official to jump. Kim Mulkey, of course, is not an elected official. She's a basketball coach. So this is going to be pretty interesting to see what this urgent matter is. But with elected officials, because they are not, because they are required to show malice if they should sue for defamation, which is almost impossible for them to win. These newspapers know that. They know that, okay, we can put something in the paper. They have no duty to investigate and really have no duty to be accurate. So they're rushing that stuff in to get those clicks, to get that web traffic. She mentioned about the click machine. She's right about that. I mean, they want to publish this thing to get as much traffic as possible. They don't want to get an exhaustive answer from the person that they're focused on. Because if they get that, then that makes the story less interesting, because there's always two sides to the story. I mean, very, very rarely is it the case that you have one 100% bad actor versus, an angel. Yes, it does happen sometimes, but most of the time, I would say over 90% of the time, there's two pretty reasonable sides to the story. Usually, of course, you have that 10%, and those cases that are out there that are good versus evil are really actually harder to find. But they're out there, but they're harder to find. I suspect in this case, this is a basketball coach. It's going to be pretty interesting, who's been around for a long time. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see if there's some really terrible story. Maybe there is. Who knows? Again, hard to comment without seeing the story. And obviously, when the story comes out, I will make another video, but just the global thing of what she's saying about that deadline issue, I've lived that one several times. Now, it was interesting also, finally, to hear her say that the reporter allegedly misled sources as to his connection with Mulkey. If that's true, then, and we don't know if that's true, but if it is, that's hugely problematic. She was claiming that the reporter had told associates of Mulkey that, he was somehow connected with her and working with her on the story, and to get those people to talk. Now, if any of that's true, that's problematic. We don't know that that's true, though. So again, let's see what the story says. I do know who the reporter is, but I'm not going to put that out there now. Just wait till the story comes out. I suspect the reporter would not be a single byline, particularly after all of this controversy right before a story comes out. But one thing is for sure, the Washington Post will really be checking this story. I mean, the Washington Post, in my view, is a little bit better, certainly a little bit better about things than the New York Times, though not by much. Both the papers know that they can sort of get away with certain things. And I think actually the New York Times is worse. The New York Times did a story on a client of mine that was unbelievable, where they just sort of put the story out there, and then when we come back and tell them all the facts that we know, that then suddenly they're not interested and don't want to publish anything. They wanted a certain type of story. The other thing that happens that is just unbelievable is when a story comes out that's very controversial and you're not contacted at all. That is amazing to me, and I've had that happen with the New York Times, and situations where you don't even know the story's coming out. The story comes out, but that's generally unheard of. But I unfortunately had a case where that did happen. And that same case where certain people making allegations, the New York Times didn't even talk to. So the New York Times didn't even interview the people making the allegations. They interviewed the people's attorneys, who of course weren't there, right? We're not at the places and times in question. But they did not interview and assess the credibility of the people making the allegation, which that to me is just pure malpractice. But we'll see what the Washington Post comes up with. Maybe it's the greatest piece of journalism in the world. Who knows? But it's going to be interesting because this thing has been rumored and been lingering on social media. So it'll be interesting what the details are. I will be back soon. Good luck.